Part 3.
In which we pretend to grow up.
The Goons were a definite influence on the Pythons, but so too was a satirical show called Beyond the Fringe, starring Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Jonathan Miller and Alan Bennett. John Cleese recalls his impressions of Beyond the Fringe.
It had a huge impact on me, but not the impact it had in London. Everyone in London shouted satire, and people discovered satire. And that's changed the society. I'm not exaggerating, because as a result of that show, that was the week that was the first really satirical and bitingly, rudely, savagely satirical show that ever had appeared on English television was suddenly there. And that changed the society, because it was the beginning of the end of, what's the word, deference. When I saw it, I had a completely different take on it. It was just the funniest show I'd ever seen in my life, and that I could ever imagine having seen, with 4 fantastic performers. I suppose Peter Cook, to me, stood out as being the funniest, but all of the others were wonderful.
And Eric also saw Beyond the Fringe.
I always loved Spike. Whenever later on, I get to enjoy him. But not as huge an effect as Peter. I mean, Peter's just like big for me, big time. I mean, extraordinarily funny. I think it's that savage contempt, which also John has a bit of, which is to nail somebody who could be easily oppressing me, but they turn around and nail them.
And so did Michael. Everyone was going.
The thing about Beyond the Fringe, they were very close to the original. I mean, the way they talked and the delivery and all that was very, very close to the way the real sort of people would have spoken. That's why it was so good. And it just moved ever so slightly to one side or the other, and that's the way it made its point. Because we actually thought, God, these are the real people talking, and they've said that. How could they? Whereas with Milligan, there was an element of fantasy and an element of invention, comic invention, which I don't think there was the same way for Beyond the Fringe.
Python is probably a synthesis of the two, isn't it, really, ultimately? Or it's the product of the two.
Eric Idle.
And I remember going to London then. But we went to London, I went with a friend, and we got tickets to Beyond the Fringe. And we could only get standing tickets. There was only standing room only. It was a Fortune Theatre. And I remember just rolling around and screaming with laughter like I've never laughed before. It was just so great. It was a life-changing experience. Totally changed my life. I had no idea. Yeah, I was at school, because I went back. I had no idea you could be that funny. I had no idea you could laugh at the Prime Ministers and the Queen and the royal family. Everything I secretly hated was being laughed and mocked at. And there they were on stage doing this so wittily and funnily. I immediately got the album and I learned everything. You know, I learned Alan Bennett's monologue. I loved Peter Cook's stuff. I loved Jonathan Miller. Just changed my life. I wanted to be funny at that point. I mean, that's what I did.
Michael Palin.
And things were loosening up too. I mean, people, after Suez in '56, the whole idea of empire seemed suddenly absurd. And anyway, it was all being given away. The kind of the severe, stern face of conservative Britain seemed to have gone, and into this sort of slight limbo afterwards came the young comedians. Later in that year, when we did the review in Edinburgh, David Frost came up to a performance and mingled with the performers afterwards. You know, didn't actually talk to me much. He shook my hand and all that, but talked to Doug. And that's when I realised that it's about writing as well. That's what he's, you know, this man who represented, you know, the absolutely one of the funniest and most successful modern television shows. That was in our midst, because he wanted writers and performers. And there was a little glimpse then, I think, when he came up. But he's recruiting people for paid work after university. And it's not just about acting, it's about review, and it's about what Robert and I have been doing through 3 or 4 years. And it's about writing and playing characters and being ahead of the game, and not just doing Shakespeare plays or even sort of modern theatrical documentaries like Hang Down Your Head and Die. So that was actually when I suddenly felt, yes, this is where you could make the bridge. And of course, eventually, that was the bridge we crossed, and that was when David, or The Office for Frost Report, this new series, got in touch with Terry and myself. Were then struggling to write something called The Love Show, and said, would you come in as writers on this new series? So, in a sense, it did tie in, and I was able to present that to my parents and the world generally as being something quite respectable. I was working with David Frost, a new BBC programme, as long as it had BBC on the end of it.
Terry Jones recounts a moment of epiphany he had in his last year at university at Oxford.
I suppose, no, that's right. No, I was just sitting there watching everybody writing and thinking. I was getting very worked up about what somebody had written about what somebody else had written about Wordsworth or Milton, I think it was. I can't remember who. And I thought, well, why am I getting so emotionally outraged by what they've written about this and what they've written? And I kind of thought, really, I just want to write this stuff in the first place. I don't want to comment on other people's comments on what somebody's written. So I suddenly hit me with a blinding flash that I didn't want to spend my life being an academic and commentator. And I wanted to do what I always wanted to do. Really. I wanted to make things. And write the raw material.
Michael Palin.
By that time, I'd worked with Terry on the Oxford Review, and acting with Terry again. You there were certain things we did together which seemed to work awfully well and awfully easily, and there was a kind of rapport between us anyway. And I just can't exactly remember the events at the end of the university period. I think we all just wanted to get some work, but Terry had asked me to write with him when I came down from university. Terry had gone down a year before. Would I come and write this project called The Love Show? And that was it, really. And I think he just wanted me to work on it. The first paycheck I ever got in my professional life was £50 signed by Willie Donaldson, who was the producer of The Love Show, in a pub in another pub moment.
The theme emerging.
Yes, and a pub in Sloane Square.